We are joined by a trauma therapist, author, storytelling expert, Marcy Pusey, a survivor of narcissistic abuse, global citizen, brain geek. Love that. I'm also such a brain geek. So we are going to we're going to talk so much about the brain. Marcy blends her lived experience with her clinical expertise to show how the stories we carry and the ones we choose to tell can shape our healing. Together, we dive deep into the connection between trauma and storytelling, post-traumatic growth, parenting through pain, and why your voice must be your medicine that someone else needs. I love that, Marcy. So thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your story and everything that you have to offer. So many questions I want to ask you. So we're going to start off with how did your lived experience shape your dealing with trauma and healing? Because you are a clinician
Yeah.
and therapist and you have that expertise, but you have the lived experience too. So how did they come together and help in your healing journey?
Yeah. They really wove together almost in parallel at different times. So I pursued education and degrees in counseling because I loved helping people and I wanted to be part of that. And so I've done that through a variety of means. And then simultaneously got married, fostered kids, adopted kids. Early in the marriage, like days before the first anniversary, my mother-in-law was murdered by my father-in-law while we were sleeping down the hall in some kind of psychotic blackout that he doesn't remember. So I've got like life things like that are really unexpected. And then some of the expected things of raising children of trauma, realizing I'm in an abusive marriage after some time. So as I was navigating those personally, there were often times where I'd go, "Oh, I read about this in my textbook. Like I know what this is from a textbook. This is what that feels like." I remember the very first time I had a panic attack and I did not know what it was. My sister happened to be with me. She'd had them. She knew what was going on and I was not convinced. And I remember as I grew convinced thinking, "Oh man, you do read that you feel like you're dying and you actually feel like you're dying." Like there was something about the textbook coming to life in my experiences, but then also times where I didn't have the textbook knowledge, where what I was experiencing either was contrary to what I'd learned or just wasn't in the literature. And so that really forced me to dive really deep into understanding and learning and seeking out like any conversations that might be addressing those kinds of things. And, for example, trauma. We talk a lot about it, but we've been mistreating it for a very long time. And I only learned that in my own deep dive study to like, how do I help these kids I'm raising? How do I now overcome the marriage and the situation that I was in there and why I landed there. So I guess to kind of sum that up, there really was an overlap and a weaving of the two together where they would just cross paths and either reinforce something with that lived experience or make me realize there's not enough information on this. I need help. And then realizing if I need help, how many other people are in the same situation and can I, share what I'm learning with others so that we're all able to heal and grow and remove the shame of the journey, which is a big piece of my heart too.
I agree with you. I think shame is such a imposed part of trauma that people don't, and then they don't talk about it, and they get more isolated, and they get more into their trauma. Um, so I want to, and feel if it's too personal and you don't want to talk about it, please feel free to say no. So when did you realize that you were in an abusive relationship? Is the first part of the question. Like, how did you like, oh, okay, this is it? So that's the first part. And then once you've answered that, I'll ask you the second.
Okay. Yeah, so that was 17 years into my marriage. We'd, raised foster kids, adopted kids. our adopted kids were, I mean, just highly traumatized before we got them. That was manifested constantly in the raising of them. And even now as young adults, they're on their own path. They're on their own path. So around the time that they were launching and leaving the house, um, I think created space for me to see us and our dynamic better, because we were into survival mode for so long in raising them and raising them alongside other kids, right? Like in a community with other kids. Like there's so much trying to protect everybody that I think it made it hard to distinguish our dynamic from that kind of survival. But also I I was raised, um I'm in Christian, but there's like a Christian subculture that really taught me as a woman, as a wife, or at least I picked up a message from the subcultures around what it meant to be a good Christian woman and a good Christian wife. And I had already brought to that messaging like my own sense of worthlessness. So for those 17 years, I thought I deserved the treatment that I received. And I thought it was my job to keep him happy, which then to a degree kept us safe. So I didn't know what to label it, because I was still caught up in like, this is my responsibility. But there was a rage, actually the last rage that occurred, um, where I had a trauma response. Again, this is one of those examples of like, I had the textbook knowledge, but it took me a minute. So I dissociated, and I felt like my body was like, oh, Marcy, sweetie, like we've been letting you try to keep yourself safe for so long. And now we're going to step in and we're going to send you to the Bahamas, and we're just going to like keep your body warm while you're gone. It was the most interesting feeling. So he's raging all through the house in front of the kids, everything that I'm doing wrong and everything that's wrong with me. And I don't know how to be married to you anymore, all this stuff. And typically I'd get very emotionally responsive and like, what do you need? What can I do to fix this? And I just kept folding laundry, because I went to the Bahamas. The warm body just kept folding laundry. And that really caused him to not like panic, but take notice. Like, this is not the dance that we do. And he was threatening to not go on a trip that we were going on in a few days. And normally I'd be like, well, then I'm not going either. And you can tell the family why we're not joining them. But instead I was like, that's fine. You've got a few days to decide, and, you can come or not come. Like, I just wasn't being reactive in the way that my nervous system would normally lead me to be. So if I fast forward just a little bit, as he reflected on that later, he wrote a letter to me where he called his behavior abusive. He said, God has shown me that I've been abusive. This is not how I should treat you. And it was the first time that I had even considered that label over the behavior. And again, I'm a therapist, right? Like, I recognize it in everybody else's stories, but in my own. And so it actually led me to research again. I was like, well, I mean, I know abuse like everybody does, like, but he's not punching me, dragging me by my hair. I don't have anything to show. So I think I fell into that a little bit for myself. But as I began to do more research into what is psychologically considered abusive, what is scientifically, like, everything that I was living fell into that category. And I realized he's right. And I'm going to say, we were serving with an organization on the mission field, and he reported to them that he had been abusive and wanted help. That lasted a very short while. So, then that flipped, and he took it all back and said, never mind, I have not. And so before anyone gets too excited, like, abusers don't turn themselves in. Well, they might if it serves their end goal for a minute, right? But when it wasn't really serving the end goal, he
That's
felt.
what I was thinking. Was it a means to get you back and to
Yeah.
get you
Yeah.
comfortable?
Yeah. Yeah. And I got to see a lot of the means to get me back. And what was interesting was I was in the Bahamas. I wasn't thinking about marriage or ending marriages. I was la la la, like, I'm great, and so, but he was hyper concerned about those things and accused, oh, are you having an affair? Are you hiding money? Like, no, I just all of a sudden have boundaries and clarity, and felt really emotionally disconnected from him, to the degree that I had to sign a receipt, a credit card receipt, and I signed my maiden name from 17 years prior. That had not happened. You maybe your first year of marriage, but
Yeah.
my body had so disconnected me. My mind had so disconnected me from that relationship that it wasn't even holding a memory of my last name for the last 17 years. So I know it's a bit of a longer answer, but I think it's important because that question comes up a lot. Like, why did you stay in abuse so long? Well, I thought I deserved it, and I wasn't calling it abuse. And it wasn't until, ironically, that he labeled it that for me that I realized he was right. And then even when he took it all back, by then I was convinced. I'm like, I've seen, no, it is. And my whole life kind of showed itself up a little differently. And yeah, so that's when I realized, was when he said it, when I researched it and went, oh, that is true. And then as I studied the narcissistic cycle of abuse, like our therapist had us draw out our dance, and it was that exact cycle, like 100%. And I was really disappointed when I realized that she hadn't called it out then. Now I understand she probably didn't have the training or experience to
Yeah.
know how to label it. But as soon as I was researching these things and going, what is abuse and how does it show up and what kinds of people do it? I saw our dance, like what we had drawn in all of the literature. And so that was really eye-opening too. Like, okay, there is a whole dynamic here. So anyway, that's how I discovered that I was in an abusive marriage.
I'm so sorry, and thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah.
Um, so, when you started to heal, did you see that there was patterning from previous relationships, from your childhood that you brought into your marriage and you felt that being acceptable? I know you said there was the religious component, but
Mhm.
was there other modeling and patterning that you had seen that was allowing you to think this to be okay?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Yes, and I mean, I guess the answer is going to be yes, but how we respond to that patterning or that modeling can be different, right? So my sister, for example. Okay, well, let me start with my parents. So my parents married quite young. I was born 11 months after they were married, and they weren't even on the same like faith page. A lot of just young and issues. They came from really broken homes, and then had me like immediately. And so they're trying to figure life out while I'm being raised. When I was about 5, they separated for 3 years. And so I had a single mom for 3 years. And right at the start of that, my little sister was born. So and then my mom later said they didn't divorce because they couldn't afford it. And then at some point, she had heard and understood or believed that like it's better for kids to have two parents than a single mom. So she ended up getting back together with my dad. And to this day, they're married. You just leave that they're still married with all the dynamics of that, right?
They figured it out somehow, some
Yeah.
way.
I mean, they've got their dynamics, but they have kept that in place. My sister, who's 5 years younger, witnessed that and said, I will never do that. I will never stay in a relationship that is like theirs or for those reasons if I'm in danger. And so she has left a number of relationships, not all of them marriages, but like sometimes long-term relationships, and with the intention of never ending up like my parents, right? So same model, but her response was, I will leave relationships. Now, often too late because she's got a really good heart and wants to see people, their potential, but like she'll leave them. This, and I was the opposite. Like, there's not divorce in our family. I'm not going to be, my sister's the divorcee one, right? Like, I'm going to pattern after keeping a marriage together no matter what. So, in that regard, yeah, I had been shown that no matter whether it's a good idea or it's healthy or it's safe or you even like each other, like, and I'm not for divorce for the slightest of reasons, right? Like, that's why I stayed in the one as long as I did. But that was my model. Like, you just do this. You made your bed, you lie in it. That's what you do. So, I was going to do that too. And, but as far as like, the dynamic in my home compared to the one I grew up with, I feel like they were kind of different. My mom was much more the stronger kind of decision maker, and I mean, they would collaborate together. I just don't think she trusted him. Anyway, so there's been times where I'm like, I didn't marry my dad. Like it's often talked about, at least not in a way that I have conscious awareness of. But for sure, what kept me in my situation as long as I did was this idea that I was not going to be like my sister over here, just, leaving everybody. I was going to be like my parents who just stayed.
So when you realized that you were in an abusive relationship, and I know there's so much else that we're going to talk about, because I know there was the other trauma of your in-laws, and there's like,
So
all of
many.
this kind of stuff. There's so much stuff, but um, I, I'm very passionate about abuse, like domestic violence, and that's.
Mm-hmm.
I want to cover this as much as we can before we move on. Um, so when you realized that you had been in a marriage for so long, did you have, and then discovered that it was abusive, did you have an identity crisis of sorts?
I don't know if I've ever been asked that. I appreciate that question. I was dissociated for a minute. Like it took a while to kind of wear off. Um, it was kind of a slow reintegration of self. So just for a bit of a timeline, that last rage happened at the end of June. We did end up going on our family trip. There was about a month and a half where he pursued help before he changed his mind. And then I was in the US on a work trip, returned to Germany where we were living in November. And then our organization gave us 4 weeks to get back to the US to get help and support because they were ill equipped to help us. And at that point, my husband was like, just kidding. I've never been abusive. If anyone's been abusive, it's her. I think she's having an affair, like all the things. So I think if there was an identity crisis, it came later than you might expect as my mind began to clear up and reintegration began. And because there was something to like, why have I not only married someone like this, but why did I adopt two kids like this as well? Like, why am I like legally binding myself to people of this kind? And what is it that attracts them to me? And what is it about me that it like wants to legally obligate myself to them? Helping them's fine, but why do I like? And I'm not sure still that I have a ton of clarity there, other than I I've read, and I think this is true, that they can be attracted to really kind, forgiving, compassionate people. And I want to see the healing and health and wholeness of every person. And I would adopt every kid if I could, and give them a home where they get to be loved and seen and known, right? And so some of that was a little bit at least reassuring, that it's not because I'm bad, it's actually because there's goodness in me that they're drawn to. But there was also that worthlessness in me that was easily exploited. So if there was an identity crisis, it was actually really profoundly helpful and good for me, because it led me to a place of, I do have worth and value. I don't deserve to be treated that way, and I won't be yelled at ever again, right? Or all the things that happened. Like, I'm not going to have that happen again. And so that wasn't immediate, but it came with some time of realizing who I am, and the boundaries that I am allowed to have and should have in any relationship. But as far as like looking back and saying, like, how did I end up here? Who am I? No. And even faith wise, like, I think that's a question. I've known a number of people to leave their faith as a result of like, well, Christianity taught me this and I did it and it was just abusive. And there was definitely a lot of church hurt in the process, because there isn't, at least not where I was, a lot of equipping around how to support a wife like me, children like mine in that kind of situation. But I was able still then to distinguish like who God is from how these people were showing up in his name or in his whatever. So even there, I didn't have a huge crisis of like, oh my goodness. I really felt like I got to discover myself and God truthfully, with a lot more clarity maybe than I had before.
That makes sense to me, because I feel like also, um, I think there's nuance to life. Like
Hmm.
it's not just a black and white. It's not like if you believe in this, you'll be like that. It's just
Yeah.
it's so much more entangled.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm also raising kids, trying to protect them, help them to have as minimal of an effect on this entire thing. I mean, they were raised in Germany for 9 years, and they had 4 weeks during COVID to say goodbye to their childhood home, their friends, their school, everything they knew. And because it was COVID, there weren't goodbye parties. It was like we just had to go like less than a week before Christmas and show up back in this place that they didn't really know. And it was just such an upheaval. And so I think, I don't even know if I had time for a true identity crisis, because I was in survival and protection mode of them for so long. I mean, and still to a degree that doesn't end, right? Like they're older now, but I'm still like for them. And so it can be really hard in that situation to even take the time for yourself, which maybe worked out for me in some ways because I couldn't just spin out. I had to keep us going. And so that was positive. But if not addressed, that could easily lead into where it comes up someday in the future, right? I've had so much therapy, I'm not worried about that now. But I think that partly why I didn't feel it so viscerally was because I couldn't. I had these kids relying on me. I had to make money for us all of a sudden. I had to like, yeah, just do as much as I could for their mental health and support them. And so I just didn't have the crisis. I couldn't.
Um, so you mentioned a little while ago that you went to this therapist and you drew out the abusive cycle, and they weren't able to identify it. I know that with my friends and some of the experience that I've had is that people aren't trauma informed, or specifically like narcissistic abuse informed. And I also want to just say, like, narcissistic abuse is different to the way that I want you to talk a little bit more on this as well. It's different to the way the person who takes too many selfies, or the person who's very self-involved, we refer to as a narcissist. I feel like it's such an overused word today.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so with all your experience that you have, being a therapist as well, how does that impact the healing and the clients that you see? Because I know that so often people go to therapists and they're like, well, they didn't see it. Sometimes they actually make a mess, or make the situation worse.
Yeah. And people with true narcissism are so good at controlling their environments and their own image and perception, that it charms therapists and they don't see it. And so it's really important to have someone who's trained in that to catch it. And even someone who's trained to catch it will still take a minute, right? But at least they're going to be looking for certain signs and behaviors and interactions and listening. I'm going to say strategically, but also intelligently, to what might be the underlying both motivation, but also just empathy, right? So when we're thinking of someone with a true narcissistic personality disorder, or even really any personality disorder, there's a real lack of an ability to truly emotionally connect with another human. I heard this and it really stuck with me, and so there's kind of this image in my mind that somebody with narcissistic personality disorder doesn't feel anchored to the earth in any kind of way. They feel a little bit like, or at their core, like they're just floating around and they need something or someone to really anchor them to the planet. And so that's where we'll hear, oh, they've got their source, right? The person that they can kind of control and hang on to and even live through. You'll hear a lot of times that they don't have necessarily their own dreams or vision. They'll often live through the dreams or vision of someone else. And so it can be really a response to that sense of emptiness and lack of connection that will lead them to be so grandiose, so kind of self-absorbed, so all the things that we think of. And the tricky part of that is because their core feels so disconnected, their systems then are always trying to protect themselves from the possibility of it being true, right? And so they don't want to leave any space to find out that they are defective or inadequate or truly not connected to the planet, right? So it's an interesting kind of thing. And so then you'll get these huge behaviors to protect that sense. So when we are interacting with someone and we're like, this person has these traits, they're not generally going to go sign themselves up for therapy or help, because then there's a little bit of like, maybe I need help. Maybe I'm part of the problem. And that's a really challenging thought for them to consider, that they might be part of the problem. They're psychology is way more, this is everyone else. I'm the victim. Everyone else is perpetrating against me. And then if you do get one into a counseling office, which they'll sometimes go, they're going to control everything. Again, like I said, the perception, the storytelling. I mean, to the point, like you said, he allegates that our therapist told him he's not abusive in a one-on-one session, even though she'd spent a few years with us and had seen the things that happened in person, right? So how did he get her to, and I wasn't there to know that if she actually said or didn't say this. I did reach out to her later and she never responded to me. So that left me to think that she probably did. And I was calling her out on something quite unethical, by the way, for a therapist to tell anybody that they're not abusive to their spouse who's not in the room with them. So yeah, like that means that after everything she witnessed, somehow he was still able to triangulate and get her to a place of like, oh no, you're not abusive. And like, yes, he was. So I don't know again what you asked, something about like working with these people and
Okay,
really
you.
going
I mean,
from
you've
them.
given it's so much
It's
information.
hard. It's hard work. And we do need trained people
Yeah.
to be able to do it. And when they come in, um, man, the test is like, how desperate are they really to have connected relationships with others? How desperate are they really to be able to keep a job and keep relationships that matter to them to do the work? And it's just really hard for them to get to that place, but they can. And when they'll engage the work, you can see good change, but it's a long road.
So I want to shift a little bit because I want to touch on the experience you had when when you were living with your in-laws and waking up to find your mother-in-law dead. Like, how did that affect your marriage and you? And how did you get over that? I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, yes, it was so unexpected, which I guess murders usually are, but it was just like, saw that his dad had, aging is kind of how we said it, like, oh, he's getting older, there's some confusion, there's some paranoia, but he at the time was 72, which I've come to learn can be quite relative. I know 90-year-olds who are like so active and just incredible. I'm like, you're what age? And then I've met like 60-year-olds that act the way you'd expect a 90-year-old to act. So I realize some people, when I say 72, might think like, that's not old. But at the time when I was whatever age I was, 20 something, like 72 is quite old. He's getting old, right? So, yeah, we just kind of wrote it off as that. And then that morning, he ended up waking us up. So, because we were in the same house, just there was like a mother-in-law suite, and they were moving out and headed back to Columbia, where his dad was from, and we were taking over the house. And so, for this time, we were overlapped. And so, he came and woke us up very calmly, like, "Hey, your mom's hurt." And we were leaving that day for El Salvador, I think. Um, anyway, the point being that we woke up into this thing. He woke us up, but the police were at the door like immediately as we were getting out of bed. So he had called them as well, but just was out of it and really disconnected from reality still, even though he had enough sense that like, oh, she's hurt and I should call the police. He did it, but he had no memory of that already at that point. Yeah. So the way it impacted our marriage was that, up until that, it was just like first year marriage stuff. Now I know with like abuse mingled in, which I can see for sure. But also just like, could you just put your socks in the hamper instead of next to the hamper? Like there was just some normal stuff like that. Like, and none of that mattered anymore. It was like, did your dad kill her or did he not? Because there was a minute where the court assigned defense attorney was trying to find anyone else who might have done it to protect his client, even though it was very evident. Um, and then this also is how I ended up meeting like all the rest of his family that I hadn't met yet. So now I'm meeting all these aunts and uncles and cousins through this tragedy, and everyone's trying to figure out what happened. And we were the only two there. So definitely, I would say there was a shift in my husband from more of the carefree, um, playful person that he was to a more serious slash not necessarily more angry. Yeah, there was a shift, right? That's just such a huge thing to navigate. And so we were front page news for 3 years. She was a decently known person in our community here in Fresno. She'd been a professor at our local university. She was white, he was black. So there's all of this like conversation around hold on, I don't know what's happening. Sorry, my phone started
No
talking
worries.
even though it's off. And I remember one day a journalist coming who'd we'd gotten to know quite a bit. They were at our house a lot. In this time, we had our firstborn son. So the journalists are coming over holding our baby. Like, it's just a weird life. And I remember him saying, like, how are you guys okay? And he shared a story of having just interviewed somebody. And after he left that interview, the person killed themselves. And that person had lost their wife and unborn child in a drive-by shooting. And so it was tragic. It was tragic. But he's like, how are you guys okay? Like what he did is not normal, but it's more in the realm of what I expect when I'm covering tragedies. And I just remember thinking, I'm not okay. What do you mean? How are you okay? I'm not okay. But there was something that stood out to people about how we were getting through it. And all I could see that could be any different was that I had a faith in a God who was bigger than circumstance that I could turn to for comfort and trust that even if I don't have all the answers and I understand there's a God who does. Like this was my journey. And so I ended up, it took about 10 years, but writing the memoir of that story. It's called While We Slept, Finding Hope and Healing After Homicide. And it was so therapeutic for me to be able to tell my part of the story. I wanted to leave the legacy for my mother-in-law that my kids have never got to know, right? I wanted to also bring some dignity to my father-in-law, which might sound weird when all I've said is he killed my mother-in-law. But he wasn't trying, he was in a psychotic blackout. He ended up being diagnosed with two types of dementia, one of them being stroke induced. And not that everybody with dementia or strokes is going to go kill somebody, but it seemed like the right interaction of chemicals. And then he'd had some alcohol, which you don't mix with meds, right? Like there's just some stuff we still don't fully understand, but he didn't remember and he missed his wife. And all the front page news showed was, right, like this black man killed his white wife, who's pretty well known in this community. And so I wanted to give more fullness to him as well. So the way that I really navigated through it was telling that story, which I end up also sharing part of in a TEDx talk related to it. And then of course there was some backlash. There were family members who were like, don't don't tell the story. But it was front page news. Like I don't feel like I was sharing things that people couldn't Google
And it's
search.
your perspective,
And it was my
like
perspective.
your experience.
Yeah, and there was no harm intended. If anything, it brought dignity
Yeah.
to him as a person. And I talked with him about it too, and he was actually the most favorable like of the family. Uh so after hitting publish, which took me a minute, one of the first reader responses I got was from a woman who said to me, "I've been in bed for months. I've been contemplating taking my own life. But your book came across me, her Kindle or whatever." And she's like, "I read it and I realized if you could overcome this, I could get out of bed today and drink water and get dressed. Like I could do that much." And she began to live her life for the first time in a long time as a result of reading my really different story from what she was experiencing. And it was so eye-opening to me that just sharing my journey could have that kind of impact on somebody. That brought just another level of healing to my own experience, right? It didn't just happen in vain. I can learn what I can learn from it, but now it's also a story that's giving someone else a reason to live. Like I never would have expected that. Or it's giving someone else hope to get through their hard thing, even if that hard thing is different. And so that's how I got through it, I think, was like finding the places where I could share and connect with others also going through hard things and be together. We get so isolated in some of these tragedies or in these traumas, not realizing that when we share the load together, it's a lot lighter. And we realize we're not alone. Even if the story has different details, the journey's pretty similar. And so that was it for me. And then again, kind of going back to the marriage, I don't know if I'll ever really be able to see the full impact of how it maybe impacted us as a marriage because abuse things were there already, but I imagine that it didn't help. Because there was a lot then that my husband had to do in relation to just usually as you get older and you realize, oh, I wish my parents had done better at this, or I want to apologize for that, or I think they need to apologize to me for this or that or the other thing, like it's gone. It was immediately taken. And so you have to then wrestle with the relationship you had with someone without their contribution to that wrestling, right? Or to that even restoration. And then same with his dad. Like his dad immediately went into a prison, and now he's in like programs where we can visit him. But now, I mean, now he's, gosh, 90. I don't know. He's that was in 2004. So yeah, it's been 20. So 92, 93. That's crazy. And so he never really got the dad that he wanted, even though he's still alive by
Yeah.
nature of all the things that happened. And so, yeah, a lot of interpersonal work for him there that I'm sure played into the relationship and just sort of exacerbated some of the things that were already there.
And did you ever have a fear that maybe you could be in harm's way, like that your husband could have something similar?
Yeah, not immediately. Initially I was like, this is not genetic. This is we don't even understand it. It's crazy. He was more concerned at first. Like immediately in the aftermath, he's like, "Oh my gosh, am I going to kill you someday?" I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think that's how this works. Um, and then right around the time after I had dissociated and we're in this kind of month and a half of him pursuing kind of help and me just like, what's going on? The Bahamas are great. He was doing the same things his dad was before the murder. So before, when I said there was some paranoia and confusion around it, his dad had accused his mom of having an affair with the gardener. He accused her of hiding like millions of dollars. She had lost some weight, so I think that was like partly where, oh, you must be having an affair with the gardener. I don't know. He was just doing some things like that, and in that week or two, or that little period of time, mine began to do the same thing, accused me of having an affair with a coworker online, an online affair, I guess. And then he asked me if I was hiding money. And so in the moment, because I'm dissociated, I wasn't connecting it to like, your dad did these same things fully. There's a little bit of it. Enough that I had shared, I think, with my sister or a friend back, and they were terrified for me. People who could a little bit witness what was happening from afar later told me, they were like, how do we get Marcy and the kids safely out of this country and away from him, because he's doing the same things. In fact, I think my sister was rereading the memoir at the time, so it was very fresh on her mind, the things that my father-in-law had done. And so other people were way more concerned than I was. Later, some things happened right before we came back to the US, like where the organization had him move out of our house for those last 4 weeks. And so he lived separately from the kids and I. But when he moved out of our house, he took the bedroom key with him and texted me something he had intended for someone else, which was, I took the key. She's not going to be able to lock me out anymore. And I screenshot that, of course, and I was like, what? And he immediately deleted it. Oh, I don't want to argue. And I'm like, you're going to need to bring that key back. He took with him our son's passport and his passport, not our daughter's, and I had mine on me. So things like that, where I don't know if a murder was coming, right? But there was definitely a change to my sense of physical safety, um, that was feeling a little different. Like, why do you need into my room when you've been asked to move out? What's your intention there? I don't know. And again, our organization around us couldn't imagine him doing those kinds of things. And so, because they knew him, right? We'd all lived there for 9 years. They couldn't imagine him being the person that he was telling them he was, that I was telling him that he was, that the kids were even like trying to. So, um, yeah. Uh, so again, kind of a longer answer, but so people were really scared for me who were not in country with me. The people who should have been scared for me didn't know how to be, because they knew this really charming, kind missionary teacher who'd been in their community for a while. And of course, I had never talked about it, because as a good Christian wife, you're not supposed to gossip about your husband. And so I didn't. And so nobody knew. And yet, yeah, I don't know what could have happened in the longer term. I did realize later that I was dying in a different way, that at a soul level, at a spirit level, like I had been diagnosed with complex PTSD during our marriage. I thought it was more related to our kids that we were raising, but after they were gone, I realized how much the medication was still helping me with my marriage as well. I ended up being diagnosed with a panic disorder and GAD, all these things. And so, and I was losing my ability to function, which is where the complex PTSD came in. So it kind of hit me later, like, gosh, I don't think I'm trying to make a connection that wasn't there. I think my death looked different. And I fortunately got out before it was complete.
I get that. Yeah, I had that same feeling. I was like, if I don't get out now, I don't know if I'll be alive. And not, I mean, I did have fear for my physical safety, but I also was mostly is like, I just don't know how this physical body is going to survive because my soul was dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're so connected. And in our Western society, we're not really taught how connected. I think there's more conversation around it now than we've had, but how one our mind and body and spirit and emotion and all of it are. And, we've got our great book, The Body Keeps the Score, super meaty, but even just that title says everything. Our body remembers, and how much chronic illness and disease and injury is a manifestation of all that's happening inside in a spiritual level, an emotional level, psychological level. And so our bodies do shut down. Healthy bodies will begin to shut down as a result of what's going on at that deeper level. And so it's really, it's an additional tragedy is how emotional and psychological and spiritual and financial abuses get separated from physical abuse in the court system, in greater conversations, because all of those become physical abuse.
Yeah.
The damage to the brain, the actual neurology that is impacted and damaged in the process of all the different kinds of abuse becomes physical. It's a physical injury that we're experiencing. It's just invisible. And so, and in fact, I've read studies that have shown that emotional abuse, psychological abuse has a longer recovery time than physical abuse. Now, obviously, they're all horrific. So that's not to like, so therefore, if you've only been physically abused, which I don't even think exists, to be physically abused is to be emotionally abused if this is someone who's supposed to love you and that you're supposed to be able to trust and feel safe with. And there's always going to be an emotional, psychological factor. But it just hasn't been acknowledged adequately, in my opinion, how detrimental and harmful the abuse is, even if a hand isn't laid on you, because they don't want evidence of the abuse on your body, right?
True. So Marcy, as we draw, this has been so fascinating. So thank you. And thank you for sharing your story so openly. But as my final question is, what would you recommend to somebody who is like, I feel so inspired by you. They want to take immediate action. They want to do something. What would you recommend that they do?
Is this someone who's in an abusive relationship or just
And
inspired?
whatever
Okay.
comes to you.
I think the thought coming to my mind is to be part of the conversation and spreading awareness, which Natasha, you're doing here in all the ways that we can, to bring these things to the light that haven't been part of the discussions that we need to have. And I think that's probably how we're going to make impact at a systemic level, culturally, is to acknowledge these things, right? I've had to do family court, and it's so fascinating. And fascinating is an interesting word to choose, but how much victims are forced to work with their abusers in court systems and like prove themselves and have to interact with them and do all these things. And you're just like, if I were in here bleeding and bruised and broken and like, would you still, maybe they would still say that you have to like work it out. It's just so counterintuitive to our sense of safety.
Yeah.
And so it further traumatizes, right? So again, I think if we're going to make a change, it's going to be by talking about these things and sharing these things. And so one thing, if you see me on Instagram, is that in my stories, I'm constantly resharing people who've just said things or who are talking about it so beautifully. And I'll talk about it too, but I'm constantly just trying to amplify other voices and create like access to resources where people can begin to do their own research and understand and advocate with their voice within their community however they can. And there's always a bit of a backlash, I've had a white Christian man write to me privately one day and tell me to stop talking because, it's making him look bad. Not him specifically, but my husband. And I was like, I'm a therapist, first of all. So if you're assuming everything I'm saying is about my husband, that's on you. I'm spreading awareness. Now, does some of it relate to my experience? Yes. But I'm not tagging him, right? I'm like, and this is you. So there is sometimes people that get really uncomfortable when we start to tell the truth about abuse. I've had men who are afraid to have their wives hang out with me because maybe I'm contagious, and these wives are going to want to leave their husbands. And I just want to say, listen, first of all, I don't wish that on anybody. But second of all, if you love your wife, like even a little bit, there would be nothing I could say or do to make her leave you. Like,
Yeah.
we're not trying to leave good men. So instead of like trying to keep her from hanging out with me, just be the good man. Like, that's your protection plan. Be a good husband, be a good partner. And I would be powerless if I even had that goal, which I don't. So, yeah, I just think talking about it, and I am saying that just to be mindful that not everyone will love it when we talk about these things, but they don't have to love it. That's actually more of a reflection on potentially how they treat people, and them having to wrap their brains around, is how I treat people abusive? Um, that's their journey. So, okay, I know. Last question. Just amplify voices, learn, share, be part of the conversation so that somebody who's feeling alone and broken and still under the messages of like, it's my job to keep this person happy, or um, to stay here in this situation forever in order to be considered a good wife or a good mom or a good anything, can see that that's not the heart of God. That's not biblical. It's not, it doesn't serve anybody to have dying wives or husbands in relationships where they're being harmed. Um, but they just need to know that there's an alternative story to the one they've been fed.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Marcy. I so appreciate it. And just again, thank you for sharing your story.
Well, thanks for having me. And again, just thank you for being one of what I'm talking about, having a platform where people can talk. You're bringing these discussions up. You're amplifying those voices. You're sharing your own, but also creating space for this to happen. And so I'm honored that I got to be here with you and partner with you in that vision. And then just so grateful that this is what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.